Hey everybody, the Retrotink 4K has officially arrived, and let me tell you, this thing is a beast. There are plenty of videos out there on YouTube already discussing the ins and outs of what this thing can do. I'm not too concerned about retreading over that, but I do want to discuss whether this device can and or should be used instead of a CRT for Super Metroid speedrunning specifically. Super Metroid is a speed game that is extremely demanding when it comes to intricate and precise movement, with timing cues throughout literally the entire run, frame-perfect and multi-frame perfect tricks, and a need for visual clarity to distinguish between pixels and terrain, both on still frames and high-speed motion frames. The demands never stop either, and that's part of what makes Super Metroid such a good speed game in my opinion. Whether you're trying to do a strat for swag so that you can look cool, we all know that's part of it, come on. Or you're just trying to go fast, every moment of the run seems jam-packed with the necessity for responsive and precise movement. And sometimes it all converges into a beautiful symphony of that precise movement, frame-perfect tricks, and swag, all at the same time. And some of these are run-ending tricks if you mess them up, so obviously we're looking for as much consistency as possible with our visual cues and our timing. From the beginning of the run with this long vertical climb up the climb and parlor rooms, to the very end of the run with the baby skip and other crazy tricks, you've got to stay on your toes, and that's hard to do if you can't see what you're doing very well, or if you're battling against input lag the entire time. Motion clarity and input responsiveness are extremely critical right up until the very end of the run. You're looking for very specific visual cues and input timing to close out the run without losing any time. So can the Retrotink 4K really replace the CRT for Super Metroid speedrunning? Well, let's find out. If you've made it this far, I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm ShinyZeni, but you can just call me Zeni. I'm primarily known as a Super Metroid speedrunner, currently holding the world record in 100% category and the reverse boss order category. I've been playing this game for a very long time now, and streaming since about 2017. Since 2019 or so, I've been using an OSSC to upscale my capture for stream, and this week I've made the jump to the Retrotink 4K. People have asked if I'll be switching from CRT as well, and I just wanted to make this video to talk about that a little bit. The first thing people generally talk about or ask about regarding speedrunning Super Metroid on a modern display instead of CRT is input lag, and for good reason. Samus is hard to control when you're lacking the responsiveness of a CRT. Even something as small as 1 or 2 frames can make a big difference in how the game feels. Already difficult rooms like Climb and Parlor become that much harder. A CRT's input lag is measured at the middle of the display generally, and is considered to be around 8 milliseconds, or half a frame in a 60 frames per second game. Modern gaming monitor displays have a wide range of input lag, some being as low as 2 to 3 milliseconds, and others much higher. It can also depend on what resolution and refresh rate your display is running at. I would recommend looking at rtings.com to see if they have done a review of your monitor, and if so, look at the test results page and scroll down to the input lag section. My current gaming monitor is an Acer Predator from a few years back, and it has a measured input lag of 5.3 milliseconds. But you also need to keep in mind the Retrotink itself is going to be adding input lag as well. Depending on your settings, I've seen it be as low as 2.5 milliseconds or so, but I've also seen it be as high as 20 plus milliseconds. I do have my eye on this Asus ROG Swift OLED, with only 2.5 milliseconds, but I don't have the budget for it right now. Well, what does all of this really even mean? Here I've recorded 10 seconds of off-screen footage at 4K 60 FPS of the lag test in the 240p Sweet ROM for the Super Nintendo. I apologize for the dip in capture quality here, but it had to be off-screen to properly illustrate, and I didn't have anything but my phone camera to capture. This lag test essentially lights up one of the numbers once per frame and counts up on the timer as well. The far right number is frames and wraps to 00 every 60 frames. These two screens were taken from the same video, I've just doubled it and cropped out everything except for the screens. Let's slow down the video to 10% speed and take a look at how far behind my gaming monitor is compared to the CRT. Here we are at 10% speed. It's still a bit hard to keep track of, but the gaming monitor is about 1 to 1.5 frames behind the CRT. Let's slow it down even more to make it even easier to see. Here I've slowed it down to just 1% speed. While the CRT is in the process of drawing, say, number 7 lit up in red, the gaming monitor is at a point where it has it 5, maybe 6 lit up in red. If the far right number on the CRT reads 42, the gaming monitor likely reads 41 or maybe 40. I've also included a screenshot here of the Retrotink's menu showing how much lag or latency is being generated in addition to what the gaming monitor already has. This number on the Retrotink can fluctuate. I've seen it as low as 2.5 milliseconds, though. So your input lag experience playing with the Retrotink 4K on a gaming monitor is going to vary based on which monitor you have. But if you have one with very low input lag, it is technically possible that you could have an experience that matches the CRT, or potentially even beats it if you're measuring the latency at the middle of the screen. The next thing we need to talk about is how the game looks using a Retrotink. Specifically, what is important is motion clarity or motion blur. Super Metroid is a game with a lot of visual cues, and especially after you get Speed Booster, seeing some of those visual cues when you're running really fast can be difficult even on a CRT. LCD monitors just inherently have motion blur, and at that point it just becomes impossible to see what you're looking for sometimes. Before we get into motion clarity itself, I'd like to take a minute briefly to show how the Retrotink 4K actually has literal CRT style filters as well. So let's get into it. Okay, so first of all, on the left here I'm showing all the different profiles the Retrotink 4K has right out of the box at launch. Most of these are console profiles, optimized so whatever console you are upscaling will look the best it can, which is amazing. At the top though, you will see a folder for CRT emulation. If you navigate into that folder, you then see 5 more folders, shown at the top middle of the screen, which all have their own different CRT models that you can emulate. The 2 screenshots I've shown here are just the first 2 folders. Each of these provides a different aesthetic. Most of these don't look very good if you're capturing your gameplay for stream or recording, but it's still cool that they exist. Here, let's take a look at just a few of these. I've recorded these off screen because they look different being captured through the capture card. The first one is my own custom settings with some very subtle scan lines. I tweaked these until they looked good on my capture, to me at least, and have received lots of compliments on my stream about them since then. This second one is the BVM 1000 TVL profile. This profile has thicker, more pronounced scan lines. This third one is the PVM 600 TVL profile. This profile is pretty similar to the BVM 1000 profile, except the scan lines are a bit less pronounced. And this last one is the Consumer Trinitron profile. Notice this one looks quite a bit different. Okay, so let's talk about motion clarity now. Here is some off-screen footage of my PVM with Samus and Aqueduct. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the vertical lines in the floor, which is the pipe that Samus is walking on. Just try to track the lines as Samus walks, then runs, then walks back and forth. Now let's slow it down and do the same thing. Depending on what type of display you have, you might have had an easier or harder time tracking the lines at full speed. But here at 25% speed, you should be able to identify each frame fairly easily and see that there's no blur on those lines. More on that in a minute. Here is some off-screen footage of the Retrotink 4K displaying on my Acer Predator, which is a 4K LCD screen. Even just with Samus walking, you might notice the lines are more difficult to track. For me personally, I can barely see them at all when she's running at full speed. Now let's slow this one down. At 25% speed, you can probably track the lines now, but they are a bit blurry. Let's compare the 2 sets of footage at the same time. Here are 2 freeze frames taken from each video. As you can see, the PVM has perfect clarity, while the LCD is blurry. This is a pretty big problem for speedrunning this game, to be honest. Personally, I used to think that input lag was the biggest issue with playing on anything other than a CRT. And while I still do think that it's a big issue, I think the larger issue is actually motion blur. I was able to experience this firsthand running at Summer Games Done Quick 2023, where they set us up to play using Retrotink 5X upscalers on their LCD displays. The input lag was something we were able to adjust to, with the proper settings. The motion blur, however, was not. I definitely made some mistakes in my run because I couldn't see properly. Well, that, and that it was 5 AM with virtually no sleep, but let's just blame the motion blur instead. There is a solution, though. Black frame insertion, or BFI for short, drastically reduces motion blur on LCD displays, and while I haven't been able to try it firsthand, I've heard the results are even better on OLED displays. I won't bore you with the nitty-gritty details, but essentially it inserts a completely black frame in between each frame of gameplay. This does, however, mean that you need a 120Hz plus display to use it, and there are some complications with capturing it as well. Suffice to say, if you have a display that can do BFI for you, that's the way to do it. The Retrotink 4K, however, can do BFI at 1080p 120, which I have footage of right here. Again, your results may vary depending on what type of display you're viewing this on, but it's a definite improvement for me at least. Let's take a look at the freeze frames again as well. While it's not perfect, it is a pretty drastic improvement, and again, I've heard that OLED displays look even better. So this is again a situation where with the right hardware, you really might technically be able to get an equivalent or perhaps even better experience with the Retrotink 4K and the right display compared to a CRT. That is just absolutely nuts to me personally, but from what I've seen, it looks like it might be a reality someday soon, if not already. So let's just do a quick recap here. Speedrunning Super Metroid requires the fast and precise response times of a CRT. Can that be achieved by a Retrotink 4K and the right display? Well, yeah, technically. Speedrunning Super Metroid also requires the visual clarity of a CRT, for things like visual cues that require precise pixel positioning and fast-moving objects as they pass by on the screen. Can that also be achieved by a Retrotink 4K and the right display? Yeah, as long as it's a high resolution and high refresh rate display that is compatible with black frame insertion, you're good to go. So I guess here's the real question. Will I be switching over from my PVM? Honestly, not at the moment. My current display doesn't quite have the response time that I would want, as it's lagging about 1+ frames behind my PVM. The other thing is that the motion clarity is still a little bit lacking for me as well, since it's an LCD and not an OLED display. Black frame insertion does help a lot, but there is still a little bit of a loss with the motion clarity there as well. But would I consider switching over in the future? For the first time ever, I can honestly say, yeah, maybe. And that blows my mind. Again, the Retrotink 4K is a beast of a machine, and I've really only scratched the surface with the vast feature set that it has in this video. If you're interested in finding out more about what it can do, I highly recommend checking out some other channels by the likes of Retro RGB, My Life in Gaming, and 8-Bit Esquire, who have done some really awesome deep dives on the topic. In the meantime, I hope to see you around. Thanks for watching.